Hello. So I'm not nearly as exciting. I'm actually just a general child neurologist who happened to have a patient with SCN8A related epilepsy back when there was not a lot of information about it. And I just wanted to summarize kind of my experience and how I ended up, I think I currently have more patients than anyone else in the world with this condition. So I'm just going through a timeline a little bit here. My first experience was the late summer of 2013. This is when Adeline was diagnosed, and at the time I had never had a patient with this. I did a lot of research, looked back. My boss is actually a geneticist, so I asked him about it. We found the one paper that was available at the time. It was Dr. Hammer's child case report, and Julianne contacted a bunch of people after we found out about that information. She brought a lot of people together, Doctor's parent, Hammer, Heather Mefford. She got my email in on that. We had a lot of email conversations. We ended up learning that Dr. Mefford and her group was working on the phenotype paper, and we kind of rapidly, she was on a deadline, we rapidly got all Adeline's information in there to get her in that paper. And that very shortly after that, at AES in 2013, Dr. Mefford was presenting on genetic epilepsies, and I kind of cornered her afterwards and said, all right, what's working? What works? What treats these patients? And she said, well, we're not really talking about that in our paper, but the children who are on sodium channel blockers seem to be doing the best. So I took that back in December to Adeline's parents and said, hey, we should probably try a sodium channel blocker. That seems to make sense. You know, the paper talks about it being a gain of function mutation, and I tease her about this all the time, but she said no. And she went and got a second opinion with somebody who actually was an expert in Dravet syndrome, and they said no. Absolutely not, don't use that medicine. And so it was a few months later, 5 months later, I finally convinced her to try it. I said, hey, this makes sense, please let me try it. And it worked. We actually subsequently got her the best seizure control that she'd had in her life, and she started to have better development. I recently saw her back in clinic, well, it's actually been half a year ago now, but I saw her back in clinic at age 3. They moved out of state, they still come back and see me. Her 3-year ASQ, which is the Ages and Stages questionnaire, it's a questionnaire that pediatricians, and I use it in my clinic in my research to look at their development, and she was normal in all categories. Her development was normal in communication, gross motor, fine motor, personal, social, and problem solving. And this is the paper that ended up coming out in 2015, which described the phenotype spectrum of SCN8A related epilepsy. And then shortly after that, in September of 2015, I had my second patient that was actually referred through Julianne and through the Facebook page and through the parent organization. They said, hey, we're doing so well with this, go talk to Dr. Harris. So they came to me, and I kind of did the same method I did with her. Got him onto trileptal. It didn't work. We're actually still working on his seizure control. It's doing a little better now on high-dose trileptal and high-dose dilantin, but we've had to play with his a little bit, but still following that same methodology that it seems like sodium channel blockers should be what works, and we're hoping it's working. The one thing that came out about this time was the survey that went through the registry and through the parents, where I was just told, because of my connection with Julianne, about how all these patients seem to be doing worse on Keppra. And that was our experience, actually, with my second patient. He had been put on Keppra and did worse. And so we weaned him off very quickly on the Keppra. It was also shortly after that, in 2015, that there was an article published, and I didn't put it up here for sake of time, but that linked SCN8A related epilepsy to cardiac arrhythmias. And so I contacted my arrhythmia specialist at Riley Hospital, and we had a bunch of meetings and talked about this and said, well, what do we do about this? And really not enough information. We should probably just do Holter monitors on these patients for now. So that's what we started doing. Every year we're doing 24-hour Holter monitors on these patients, and then my rhythm specialist is seeing them back. And then my third patient happened in 2016. This was one actually with a colleague of mine who was a 12-year-old who has had static encephalopathy his entire life, had had seizures his entire life, and someone decided to go ahead and get the epilepsy panel, and they found an SCN8A related mutation. And this child had been on Keppra for probably 8 years. And so that was my first step, was got him off that. And he had never been on trileptal. So we put him on trileptal, very high dose. His seizures improved significantly. This was a child who came into the clinic when I saw him wheelchair bound, nonverbal. And he is now walking again. He's not very verbal, but he's having behavioral outbursts. He's kind of showing some autistic features, but he was nonverbal and wheelchair bound. He's walking again. So we're getting there. He's not got 100% improvement in his seizures yet, but he's seeing my colleague, so it's kind of a little bit of me telling her what I think she should do and her maybe not necessarily being as aggressive as I tend to be. I push kids on very, very high levels, and I monitor levels and I monitor sodium levels too, because I don't want there to get hyponatremia from being on really high doses of sodium channel blockers, but it doesn't seem to be happening. And then the paper came out kind of early or late 2015, early 2016 that actually supported what I've been doing. The 4 patients that were on really high dose phenytoin, they were requiring levels in the 30s, which most of us would say that's a toxic level as a child neurologist. You don't want somebody at a level of the 30s in phenytoin. But that was the level these patients were requiring. So that was helpful to me that it was supporting kind of what I was doing clinically. And then I saw my 4th patient face-to-face just this year in 2016. This was a child who had seizures since 2 months of age. This started out as a phone consult. As many in this room have talked to me by phone or email, or I've talked to your doctors by phone. I have people call me and I suggest, here's what I've done. I'm not a researcher. I'm not doing this as a research basis. This is clinical. This is what has seemed to work. And so we actually met face-to-face at age 2 and transitioned her over the phone to sodium channel blockers. She was already on some phenytoin, and we had been playing with her phenytoin and her trileptal, and she's had improved seizure control. And last I heard, she was having some improved development and doing a lot better too. So my take-home point is I agree. The genetic epilepsies, I think they're just amazing in our opportunity to target treatments to the phenotype. As a general child neurologist, we need to remember that we need to read up on recent literature and we get something that we've not seen before and not just lump it in to things that we think we know about. Unlikely these patients need very high doses of sodium channel blockers. I've used trileptal at sometimes twice what's considered the maximum upper limit to get a therapeutic level in a patient, and they've tolerated it. And using dilantin at levels that we normally would consider toxic, but these children seem to tolerate it. Now, ultimately, I really hope that we get targeted treatment because I think that's the future, and I think that would help a lot with all the side effects we're having from using such high-dose sodium channel blockers. And then recently, I sat down, or multiple emails back and forth with Julianne and the group about publishing in that brochure what's been working and our recommendations. So the recommendations are early, high-dose sodium channel blockers and avoiding levetiracetam, and monitoring levels to find that individual goal for the patient and not being afraid of published max doses. Monitoring the sodium levels, I haven't had any that have been abnormal, but outside of this population I have. And then because of the risk for SUDEP, and also with several of my patients, apnea seems to be a really big part of their seizures, and going apneic in another room when mom and dad aren't around is kind of scary. So we use some kind of apnea monitor or Biox or something to alert parents that they're having a seizure or that they might have stopped breathing or had arrhythmia. And I just recommend that all parents are CPR trained so that they can do something about it if they do see their parent or see their child in distress. And then I also have started in the last year doing cardiology consults annually for these patients with a rhythm specialist. And that's all in the brochures that are outside there. If anyone wants to take those home, that's what I recommend to other physicians who get a patient with SCN8A related epilepsy. So that's all I have.